Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of our Student Spotlight series. In this series, we invite the exceptional students who've partaken in the various research programs at CCIR to share a little bit about who they are, what their research was on, and how their experience doing research was like for them. So today, it's my pleasure to have with us Sydney Gasper. Sydney took the Race, Racism, and Society course under the mentorship of Dr. Dana Brablick from Cambridge. And today, she'll be sharing a little bit about her experiences doing that research and what she learned. And I'm really excited to learn more. So welcome, Sydney.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Sydney, to begin, would you mind doing a quick introduction of yourself, just telling us who you are, how old you are, and a little bit about your project?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Sydney Gasper, obviously, and I'm 16 years old. I live in Washington State in the United States. And this summer, I did a project on kind of examining structural racism and how that affects like maternal mortality rates, specifically for Black women in America, and also potential solutions on how to solve those issues. So.
Okay, cool. And so let's begin perhaps by diving a little bit into your project, because it's a super interesting project. So I think the first thing I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about is the details of this story that you try to present to us, which is, let's first focus on the problem. Sort of, what are some of the causal factors here at play that you've looked into that's been causing this disproportional mortality rate among Black women in the United States?
Yeah, for sure. So Black women in the United States are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth than like their white counterpart. And that has nothing to do, like that statistic has nothing to do with like not historical, but like patient background for like health reasons. It has everything to do with kind of the oppression that Black women oftentimes face more so than a white woman, or the disproportionate unfairness, I want to say, inside the hospital rooms. There's a common misconception that Black women, or like common stereotype that Black women can handle pain more. So oftentimes a doctor won't listen to his or her patient. And I think also being a woman has something to play here, because a word you oftentimes hear describing a woman is hysterical, but you will never hear a man described as hysterical. And I think in the medicine world, especially in like maternal care, doctors tend not to listen to women because they are so called hysterical, as well as the racism that comes to play here. So
3 to 4 times is crazy. That's a shocking statistic. And I was a little bit surprised when you just said that the sort of patient history doesn't have a part to play in it, because I would imagine, because I haven't read your paper, but the title of the paper is sort of looking at the structural causes. And I imagine the structural influence would perhaps extend to sort of existing, what do you call those, like the underlying conditions and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I stated that, I was talking more to like like heart conditions or like diabetes or something that can kind of affect a mother. And I think what you said was absolutely correct. Like the structural impact is 100% there. And I wrote about this in my paper about how like the lack of nutrition or lack of programs where women, especially Black women who are more oppressed in America, don't have access to like prenatal vitamins or like healthy nutrition to support herself and her baby. And then all of that catches up to her when she goes to give birth, because she's more at risk she's not as healthy as somebody else who had access to all of those things during her prenatal care. So
cool. I see now. So let me just clarify once more, because that statistic's wild. I haven't heard of that one before, but is what you're saying that it's after you control for pre-existing conditions, it's still 3 to 4 times, or does that 3 to 4 times factor in those pre-existing conditions? Like, I don't know if the question is clear.
yeah, so the statistic comes from the CDC, so I don't think when I was researching into it, it didn't specifically like say, oh, we're like excluding conditions X, Y, and Z into the statistic. I think it was just kind of based off of what they see in the delivery room. So a woman, yes, the prenatal care impacts it, and yes, sometimes their background in the health, like their health background can come into play, but that's not like the largest supporting factor that impacts like death during childbirth. The things that like highly impact it are lack of nutrition and prenatal care and programs, and then also postpartum, like the lack of oftentimes like postpartum depression or stuff like that, where they don't have access to programs where they can be supported and kind of easily guided into motherhood instead of just kind of being thrown into the deep end.
So I think before we move on to sort of potential solutions that you were looking into, I want to hear about sort of more of, so I imagine this was also something that you learned in the course. Like, did you know about this before coming into like these statistics, or how dramatic these statistics were?
Yeah, so when I was first applying, I was looking for things to do over the summer. And when I was first applying, I saw this Cambridge course on race and racism. And I was sitting with my mom, and she mentioned this statistic about how Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. And that just like shocked me, because I feel like everybody should get a chance to not only live, but to be ordered to give birth. And without that opportunity present for them, I feel like that's just unfair, and the system is like messed up. So I really wanted to, I did know about the statistic beforehand, but we didn't really touch on it during the course. We touched on like intersectionality of like being Black and being a woman and having a certain amount of income and stuff like that, but we didn't touch on specifically like maternal mortality rates.
Okay, interesting. And I guess the follow-up question would be, as you learned more about these rather stark social realities, how did that make how did that make you feel? Like, was there also sort of a emotional aspect to your research as you learned more about this?
I think yes, I think it's kind of hard to keep the emotion out of it just because it's such a heavy topic. While I chose this topic because it meant something to me, and because the starting statistic was so shocking, and I wanted to learn why and how the structure came to be to where Black women are so strongly like oppressed against. I think that I was able to keep the emotion out while researching, but still being able to kind of not internalize it, but be able to understand and kind of empathize with it, the stuff that I was reading, which I think was important in just making sure that I wasn't kind of, well, I'm obviously not a Black woman, and I'm also not pregnant. So I can't say, oh, this is how they feel X, Y, and Z. So I think hearing stories about Black women who have experienced this and kind of empathizing and sympathizing with them, but not taking their experience and making it my own, was important.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said. I want to turn back a little bit to a concept you you invoked just a while back. So you mentioned intersectionality, and that's a really that's a word that's like often thrown around quite a bit. And I was wondering if, and I think it's actually a much more sophisticated and nuanced concept than a lot of people give it credit for. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you learned during the course with regards to this concept?
Yeah, for sure. So just like as a setup for the course, each week we learned about like a new topic. So for example, we learned about like intersectionality for 1 week, and then we'd talk about it the next week with our TA, and then we'd lecture for like Indigenous people in North America, and then lecture about it or discuss it with our TA. So when we learned about intersectionality, the lecture portion was super interesting, but I feel like where I started to grasp the concept more was during the TA sessions, where I was able to kind of bounce ideas off of my peers as well as the TA. And I think that intersectionality in this case is kind of, I feel like it kind of explains itself. It's like the intersection of every kind of variable you could think of and how that impacts somebody inside, like for like an economic standpoint or a social class standpoint. So for example, something might be you're a black female, you're black and then you're female, but you also have low social status, you don't have health care, and you don't live in a neighborhood where you have access to primary doctors. Like someone like that is going to have a much, much, much more difficult time than a white female who's like on the completely opposite side of the spectrum, who's like high middle class, who is, I don't know, has access to private doctors. And I feel like that's kind of what I looked into when I was researching this, was all of the different components that kind of come to play here, because there's so many aspects that impact pregnancy. So I feel like controlling the variables and kind of sticking to Black female, lower income class, potential no healthcare was kind of the zone I was focusing in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so turning now to potential solutions. I mean, that's a very challenging thing, and obviously, no one's expecting a simple solution. But I think it's very useful and constructive to begin sort of looking at not just the problem, but how to deal with it. So, what were one, how were you thinking about these issues, and two, what did you end up sort of coming to a conclusion to?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to kind of come to one conclusion for a solution, just because there's like 3 trimesters of pregnancy and each one has like a different impact on the mother. So I think having multiple solutions and multiple options is like the best way to move forward, because what may work for one mother is not going to work for another one. So having these programs where we can kind of pick and choose and be able to ask for help, and making sure that they're comfortable asking for help is super important. Because I feel like mental health also, I talked about this briefly earlier, but like postpartum depression and mental health is oftentimes stigmatized as something that people don't often talk about, even though it's just as important as your physical health. So creating an environment within programs to be able to have mothers like speak and also separate themselves from their children, even though that their children are extremely important to them, like realizing and kind of internalizing that, oh, like I just gave birth, I birthed a human, let's just kind of focus on my mental health as well as caring for my child. And I think there's actually a lot of programs in the US that do this, especially for prenatal care, and kind of making sure that there's like programs, I can't remember the exact name, and I probably should know this, but there's a program where mothers are able to ask for mental health assistance after they give birth, as well as kind of having access to healthy foods and prenatal vitamins during their kind of first trimester and of pregnancy, and which is really, I think, key to making sure that women stay healthy during their pregnancies, because you can't just I don't want to say give it to them, because that doesn't seem like a fair way to put it, but having the programs available and having the women come to you is, I think, what's important, because you need to seek your own health in order for it to have the largest impact.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. I think that's super interesting, both the problem that you decided to investigate, and also the fact that you were actually looking into potential solutions. I think this is one of the reasons we picked your project to spotlight was because, one, its social relevance, and also sort of the fact that it was so active in its focus on looking for solutions. And I think politically, that's sort of a rather exemplary way of trying to deal with problems. So now I want to slightly pivot and talk a little bit more about your experience working with Dr. Brablek and Dr. Gazelle. So you mentioned earlier that TA sessions were incredibly helpful for helping you grasp the concepts, because you got to engage in these in-depth discussions. Can you tell me a little bit more about your experience, just, I think, more generally with this type of classroom discussion, and how that helped you learn and what that experience was like?
For sure. So for me, I am not like an audio learner. I can't just watch something and then completely understand it. I have to kind of be able to come to my own conclusions. So having the lecture and then the TA session was extremely helpful for me, because I got the opportunity to kind of learn in a college like lecture setting, and then be able to discuss it and dive deeper with my classmates who were also kind of the same age group as me. So it was extremely helpful for me to be able to discuss it after and kind of settle and internalize it and kind of pick it apart with my own brain, and then be able to discuss it with like help of somebody who has studied this much more broadly than anybody else that was like in my class, like our TA. So I think having that opportunity was which is what really helped me kind of get through the class and be able to understand everything that was happening.
And so I often say that with CCIR, when our faculty aren't just sort of teachers, they're really mentors. Yeah. And where I understand the difference to be between someone who just transmits information and someone who's really sort of guiding you through something and helping you out, and being a certain kind of, at times, maybe a model for how to think rather than someone who's telling you how to think. What was sort of your mentorship experience like with Dr. Brablek and Dr. Gazelle?
Yeah, so like you were saying, I really did enjoy the fact that they were asking you how to think and not telling you how to think. I think something like race is extremely difficult to talk about, because it stems from something so political, and everybody kind of has their own view on it, whether that's right or wrong in whoever's opinion. But having two mentors where I was able to kind of think about it on my own, but then kind of be argumentative per se, to ask questions and kind of push the boundary of what we were talking about and how that impacted our society today. And having such a small class size, there's like 2 other kids in my class, having such a small class size really helped me grasp the concepts and created an environment where I was comfortable to kind of speak my mind, whether my opinion was right or wrong, to whomever was in the class. But I think the relationship and kind of community that both lecturers, both Dr. Hansel and Dr. Black kind of put out there was extremely helpful to grasp my own opinion and not just be told an opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, where one of the great things, especially about higher education, is that you really enter into a space where, and I think especially in the seminar room, it's a space to test thoughts out, as well as it's not just to say what's is right, but also try to defend yourself with arguments, try to understand different perspectives. And I think that's also something, especially in the humanities and social science courses, that we try to push for. Okay, so I have sort of two more questions as we begin to wrap up. One is a two-part question. The first part is, have you sort of done any kind of research project at this scale before?
I haven't, which is what I think made it challenging, but also in a good way. I'm a junior in high school, and with COVID and all, the curriculum has kind of been cut into like half. So writing a research paper that kind of builds my own ideas based off of research that I've done, and not in like a literary sense, but in a like modern world sense, is not something I've done before, which is why I think it was extremely beneficial for me, and also it was a good challenge. So.
Well, you kind of already touched on the second part of that question, but I was going to ask, how has doing research differed, like writing a research paper? How do you think, or going through this whole course, how does that differ from, I don't know, taking AP US history and writing a final paper for that class?
Yeah, so I think for a class like AP US history, you're oftentimes told what to write, even though they try to get you to draw your own conclusions. The answer is kind of already there. With something like this, where you're kind of examining multiple different documents or articles or whatever it may be over the span of like the entire internet or everything that's accessible to you, I think that you kind of learn to draw your own conclusions and put together pieces that different authors have written about, and kind of create your own out of that. Instead of searching for an answer in text, you're kind of drawing your own answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And again, that's I think there's a huge difference between what a lot of education researchers call passive and active learning, and research definitely forces you to be an active learner, to seek out your own interests and pursue your own lines of thought. So it's so great to hear that was your experience. So the final question with which I wrap up most of these student spotlight videos is basically asking you what you have to say to kids who might be interested in research, but maybe a little bit daunted by it. What would you say was maybe your takeaways from the experience? And yeah.
I think finding a mentor who can help you and kind of guide you along the way is important, because not only do you find your own perspective, but you can also look into somebody else's glance and kind of see how they think about the topic and the issue. And whether that's a mentor or like a friend or somebody else that you also do research with, and kind of bounce your ideas back and forth on to draw a conclusion or to not draw a conclusion, is something that I think is extremely beneficial, if not only for like a research sense, but kind of in every aspect of life. So I think finding somebody who you're comfortable sharing your ideas with, and you are able to create that community and that bond of where you know that your opinion won't be judged or it won't be criticized, or and it won't be like, but it will be analyzed and kind of argumented back to you, but not in a sense where you feel like your opinion is being shut down. And I think that's kind of what I found through CCIR, and I highly recommend.
Cool. Glad to hear it. Well, thank you so much, Sydney, for your time today. It was super interesting learning about your research and to learn about your experience here. And it sounds like you had a pretty solid experience. And I'd actually be keen to read your research paper because this conversation has really spiked my interest. But thank you once more, and congratulations on being selected as one of the Spotlight Scholars.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.